And we're starting with AEW, and after a truly wild month, the company hoped to set things straight with this year's Grand Slam special, which kicked off with last night's Dynamite at Arthur Ashe Stadium. The show had plenty of surprises in store for fans, including a nod to Seth Rollins during Jon Moxley's match with Fenix. At one point in the match, Moxley dropped Fenix with a stomp on the entrance ramp, and the crowd, clearly seeing this as a nod to his Shield ally, sang Rollins' theme in Arthur Ashe Stadium. One surprise that wasn't welcomed was during the opening match's closing sequence, as there was clearly something that didn't go according to plan. The highly competitive match had an unusual finish, with Fenix hitting an over-the-shoulder sit-out piledriver, and Moxley did not kick out of the pin, despite referee Rick Knox holding up on the count of 2. After a moment of awkwardness, Fenix lifted Moxley and hit the move a second time, to which Moxley stayed down for the pin, and what exactly happened? Well, it turned out this finish with the second piledriver was improvised, as Moxley got hurt during the match, and the original plan had been for Moxley to retain the title. Post-match, Fenix celebrated while ringside doctors tended to Moxley, who was able to walk to the back on his own. That only happened after the doctors spent considerable time tending to him in the ring, and the fans serenaded the former champion with Moxley chants as he left with a ringside doctor following. PW Insider was able to confirm that Moxley made it to the back without anyone's help, but was checked down right away as he got backstage, and is believed to have suffered a concussion. WrestleVotes also shared a photo showing several individuals outside of Moxley's bus in the Arthur Ashe Stadium parking lot, including his wife Renee Paquette, Toni Khan, and BCC allies Claudio Castagnoli and Wheeler Yuta. Another individual who appeared to be Orange Cassidy or AEW Vice President of Talent Development Pat Buck was also present at what was clearly not an easy situation. Injuries are never a good thing, and that's especially the case when it comes to concussions, but these are still early days, and we'll have complete updates as they are made available. We're hoping for the best for Jon Moxley, as he apparently recovers from an injury. For more updates on this story and many more, please keep it tuned with us here at Slat Rock Wrestling. Jon Moxley gave a lot to the pro wrestling business, and AEW Grand Slam was no different. What's your take on the situation? Sound off in the comments to let us know what you think. In the main event of the evening, AEW World Champion MJF proved resilient throughout his defense against Samoa Joe, though should be giving some props to Adam Cole. It was Cole at ringside who wheeled MJF out of the coquina clutch and provided him the steel chain that helped him choke out the challenger and retain the title. MJF once again proved that he may be the best babyface AEW has today, and endured a hell of a beating from Joe, but would not give up his AEW World title, especially in front of his home state crowd. MJF refused to quit even when Joe delivered a piledriver on the exposed floor, which led to doctors and security surrounding the champ, only for Joe to scare and fight them off. The look of shock on Joe's face when MJF kicked out was perfect, as was the finish, which saw MJF use a chain, covered it with his arms, and choke Joe out to retain the AEW World Championship. We have to give props to AEW for MJF being a babyface, but without fully ditching his villainous roots, as the finish stayed true to MJF's underhanded history, despite his current role. If anything, MJF using the chain only highlighted Joe's aura as an unstoppable monster, and the match ensured that the MJF Cole story will remain a key element of AEW in the latter part of 2023. In short, this was a strong main event performance from the company's MVP and MJF, and another stellar outing for Joe, who is quickly becoming one of the best heels in the industry. MJF had done plenty to drum up interest in Dynamite, which had been seriously suffering in ticket sales until just days before the event. AEW sources that spoke to PW Insider noted that the show saw a sizable surge in ticket sales on Tuesday evening following MJF's appearance on CBS New York, as well as appearing at a Mets game over the weekend. Tuesday was in fact the largest individual day of ticket sales since Grand Slam Dynamite tickets went on sale, showing that the efforts of MJF paid off. It was while appearing for the Mets that MJF spoke about the recent PWI 500 ranking, which saw members of The Shield take 1, 2, and 3, while the AEW champ was number 6. MJF took aim at number 5 ranked El Hijo del Vikingo, saying that nobody can name 2 of his matches, and while he said Seth Rollins, Jon Moxley, and Roman Reigns are all talented, he believes they're not on his level. MJF closed out a chock-full episode of Dynamite with big moments and title changes, with Eddie Kingston's ROH title win being one of the many highlights of the show. Sammy Guevara's heel turn, Fenix defeating Mox, Saraya retaining her gold, and MJF slaying the beast that is Samoa Joe helped make this a noteworthy show. The show may not have been the spectacle that Grand Slam was 2 years ago, but it was still a great event. With Wrestle Dream on October 1st, it kind of hurts the long-term impact of this broadcast to an extent, but the company has done a strong job of making the annual trek to Arthur Ashe Stadium feel like a marquee event. Unfortunately, Adam Cole may have suffered an injury during Grand Slam, as a source at the show said that when he ran in to cheer on MJF, he seemed to hurt his ankle and was seen limping. Sean Ross Sapp later reported that Cole was in obvious pain and seen on crutches, but has been discharged from a nearby hospital, and we hope to get more details as they come out. Dynamite also saw Chris Jericho face Sammy Guevara, and while the inaugural AEW World Champion was hoping this match would allow the pair to move on from their differences, that didn't happen. The match ended with Jericho getting the win, and the two shook hands and embraced after the bout, but that was before Guevara low-blowed his mentor and shoved him to the ground. Older fans immediately recognized that this spot was almost an exact replication of a WWE spot from WrestleMania 19, in which Jericho lost to Shawn Michaels and had a similar reaction to Sammy. After losing to HBK in Seattle, Jericho hugged the man he once considered a mentor, only to low blow him and shove him to the ground, and now Jericho has had a taste of his own medicine. Not only did Guevara and Jericho recreate the spot, but they also used matching colors, with Sammy wearing blue, white, and gold like Chris did in 2003, and Jericho wearing red and black, similar to HBK. After that move, Don Callis walked out smiling, and it appears that Sammy Guevara is now a part of Don Callis' stable, in quite the get for the veteran manager, who was able to split the JAS. There was a botch in the match when Jericho tried to bounce from the turnbuckle to hit a springboard dropkick, and Guevara was set to counter that with a super kick of his own, but both missed the timing. But what did you think of this match and the nod to what transpired at WrestleMania 19 in 2003? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. More from AEW as Toni Storm and Saraya know each other very well, so it was somewhat fitting that both cheated in their women's championship match on Dynamite. In the end, Saraya out-wrestled her former ally, dodging a hip attack and delivering a modified spike DDT to retain her title, and while there's an argument that this was the less interesting outcome, there is still time and interest in Storm's entertaining person to grow. Storm kissing Saraya, then dropping her with Storm Zero, was a fun addition to the match, and if nothing else, a great way for Storm to play mind games with the shaken champion. The question now is, where does the AEW Women's Division go before a Saraya-Storm rematch, and is there anyone interesting or credible enough to step up to Saraya? AEW's creative team will also need to figure out how to enhance Saraya as a champion and take advantage of her star power, and it'll be interesting to see what's next for her. This week, WWE hosted a staff-wide meeting following mass layoffs last week that resulted in over 100 people losing their jobs. We already reported about the meeting, but now new details have come to light, including details about a comment that Vince McMahon made that angered the workforce. During the meeting, McMahon said that WWE had plateaued and that the Endeavor deal was needed to take the company to the next level. According to PW Insider, several employees expressed their dissatisfaction with this statement, arguing that WWE's business was thriving in late 2022 when McMahon was retired. Some argued that if business wasn't doing weak, the board wouldn't have rejected McMahon's initial attempt to return, which resulted in Vince strong-arming his way back into power. McMahon forcing himself back onto the board, accompanied by Stephanie McMahon's resignation from the company, generated sympathy and support for the latter and Triple H among some attendees. The meeting also saw Emanuel speak about his daughter Ashlee, who is now working for WWE, but what he had to say sparked various interpretations. While some saw it as nothing more than a playful dad joke and a father embarrassing his daughter at work, others took it more seriously as Ari essentially handing his daughter a high-paying job. It was clarified that Emanuel's daughter had been working with WWE for a considerable time, and her employment was not contingent on Endeavor's acquisition of the company. Emanuel himself made an effort to connect with employees at the meeting, shaking hands and making himself accessible, and interestingly, Triple H didn't formally address the employees from the stage. This is quite the change for the Game, who has often played a prominent role in meetings like this, but Triple H did not speak in an official role to the 300 to 400 staff members in attendance. Some employees were experiencing the new tower in WWE's new headquarters for the first time, as their divisions had not yet relocated to the new facility, which will be in Stamford. Emanuel and other execs remained present to engage in conversations and interactions with employees, and the only exception was Vince McMahon, who immediately left after the presentation. Some suggested that McMahon's swift exit is a sign that he's still recovering from back surgery despite his recent return to working, mere months after what was called a life-altering operation. But what do you make of the dynamics and sentiments shared during this meeting, and do you think the interaction between staff and leadership will impact WWE's future under Endeavor? Leave us a comment down below. McMahon may be standing tall in the wrestling world once again, albeit under Emanuel, but at 78 years old, the TKO executive chairman isn't the spring chicken he once was. PW Insider reports that McMahon was seen using a cane for assistance while climbing the stairs to the stage, and used the cane to support himself as he approached the podium. It was back in July that McMahon underwent spinal surgery, which was described as major at the time, but that hasn't stopped him from returning to his old job. McMahon will no doubt be aware that many in WWE didn't want to see him return, and the billionaire tried to lighten things up, but his efforts quickly fell flat. McMahon tried to engage the employees by humorously quipping, "I'm Vince McMahon, damn it!" which was met with silence, with Vince prompting, "This is when you're supposed to clap." Perhaps fearing what would become of them if they didn't clap, those in attendance applauded, with McMahon in a not too different to some North Korean dictator quipping, "You're learning." Then McMahon gave his speech with a comment about WWE stagnating despite all evidence to the contrary, leading to a lot of eye-rolling by those in attendance. Interestingly, the entire meeting was filmed with a complete WWE production crew, with the executives emerging from behind an old Raw set in footage that many would love to see. McMahon may have tried to have some fun in Stamford, but with the UFC merger proceeding amid federal government investigations into McMahon, he may not be laughing for long. The investigation relates to McMahon's undisclosed payments related to last summer's hush money scandal, which should have been disclosed by Vince and the company. The reasoning is that while McMahon paid out of his own pocket, those payments benefited WWE's image, as those women involved kept quiet for years, and since it helped WWE, it should have been disclosed. Jacob Frankel, chair of Dickinson Wright's Government Investigations and Securities Enforcement Practice Group and a former senior counsel in the SEC's Division of Enforcement, suggested to the LA Times this week that McMahon could face serious consequences due to investigation, stating, "Depending on the potential findings following the inquiry into Vince McMahon, McMahon could face criminal and/or civil liabilities that could prevent him from serving as an officer or a director of a public company." It was on July 17th that federal authorities executed a search warrant and subpoenaed McMahon, but at this time, no charges have been filed against the wrestling juggernaut yet. During the Joe Rogan Experience, Kurt Angle said that McMahon plans to live until he's 120, which would be 2065, and knowing Vince, he'll likely be micromanaging backstage at WrestleMania 81. Time will tell how many of his remaining years McMahon spends behind bars, but if there's one thing that should be known about Vince McMahon, it's that he's a fighter who'll do whatever it takes to come out on top. Over to NXT, as last week's show drew the highest ratings in the past 3 years, with many attributing this to Becky Lynch's arrival and NXT Women's Championship victory. Now the man has done it again, as the show has surpassed 800,000 viewers for the second week in a row, proving that the new NXT Women's Champion is a draw, no matter what show she's on. On this week's Raw, the Judgment Day were once again prominently featured on the show, with Dominic Mysterio taking on Cody Rhodes in the show's opener. Rhea Ripley was not with her Dom on the show though, as her absence was explained as due to a rib injury, and instead it was Finn Balor and Damian Priest who served as backup for Dirty Dom. Fightful Select has now learned, though, that Dominic was actually supposed to have support from outside the faction, and initially the plan was for JD McDonough to accompany him to the ring. These plans were then changed, and McDonough was conspicuously absent from the entire show, and it's been reported that the call to pull JD was a sudden decision made by the management. As to why McDonough was pulled from the plans and from Raw entirely, that's difficult to say, but it's raised questions as to when, if ever, he'll become an official Judgment Day member. For months, McDonough has associated himself with the group, but is yet to be fully welcomed, and after being pulled from Raw, it may be a while yet before JD the Superstar is part of the JD faction. On social media recently, a photo of Jade Cargill has been floating around, showing the now former AEW star training at WWE's Performance Center. While Cargill is said to have been attending the center this week, this photo is something of a misdirect, as this image is from years ago prior to AEW when she had a WWE tryout. Cargill is currently at the center, as almost every wrestler that is brought in or returns to WWE is required to make a trip to the facility for inductions and to be assigned a coach and a producer. WWE management has instructed those at the Performance Center that Cargill is a priority signing right now, so everyone working there should make her experience as positive as possible. The consensus among many is that Cargill will sign with WWE, and who do you want the former AEW TBS champion to lock horns with first as a superstar on the main roster? Some have said she should join the Street Profits and Bobby Lashley to counteract Rhea Ripley when the Profits and Lashley feud with the Judgment Day, and is this something you'd like to see? Let us know in the comments. More from Raw, as Tegan Nox was supposed to compete on this week's show, and the shot at the NXT Women's Champion Becky Lynch would have been her biggest match since returning to WWE. Instead, Nox faced Xia Li on WWE Main Event, while Natalya, Li's original opponent, faced Lynch in the title match, and the pair had a nice, albeit predictable match, which saw the man retain. When Ringside News asked about the change, they were told that the decision was made for the title match not to have someone who has been off of TV for a while, which in this case was Nox. The belief was that with this being the first NXT Women's title defense on Raw, the match should not have featured someone who's barely been used, and it was said that Vince McMahon made that change. The feeling was it enhanced the brand more to have a well-known veteran going after the NXT Women's title, and some have argued that Nox didn't lose out, given she was never going to win the title anyway. Nox hasn't competed on Raw since losing a Women's Tag Title #1 contendership turmoil match on July 3rd, and it's worth stressing that she's not injured, but simply isn't being featured on Raw. Becky Lynch had actually personally requested Nox for her title match, but was overruled by WWE, and we'll have to see if Nox gets any kind of love on the main roster, or if she's doomed to remain on WWE Main Event. If you listen to MJF for any length of time, you'll hear the AEW World Champion put his name up there with some of the all-time greats, and that confidence was on display at this week's Dynamite. Prior to his title match with Samoa Joe, MJF reenacted a classic Bret Hart commercial from the 90s, which sees a fan yell Bret's name, and Hart turn back and bestow his iconic pink sunglasses on the young fan. In MJF's recreation, the AEW World Champion bestowed his signature Burberry scarf in lieu of the glasses, in quite the babyface move by the man who proudly calls himself a scumbag. That was until MJF whispered something in the young boy's ear, and the fan turned to his father to question if he was really adopted, as MJF had told him, earning a pop from the crowd. PW Insider would learn that this fan is no adopted orphan, but is in fact the son of Craig Steele, a wrestler for the WrestlePro promotion. MJF may not be the villain he once was, but he still has a twisted side, and this segment made for quite the viewing during this week's episode of AEW Dynamite. In 2017, Jake Hager signed with Bellator MMA and would have a handful of matches, but now, close to 3 years since his last fight, his time in the cage is over. During a K&S virtual signing, Hager said he's retired from MMA, stating that Bellator jerked him around, which caused differences between the two sides, and now Hager is focusing his efforts on wrestling and AEW. More from Grand Slam, as Arthur Ashe Stadium has hosted AEW special for years, and now the venue could receive its own pay-per-view. Speaking to the crowd live, Tony Khan asked if AEW should bring a pay-per-view to Arthur Ashe, and received a resounding yes chant, and we'll have to see if this happens down the line. This year, former AEW producer BJ Whitmer was indicted on charges of first-degree burglary and second-degree strangulation, and more details have come to light as to what is alleged to have happened. In a statement, Whitmer's former partner said he came to their house and was strangling her through 2 rooms in the house, saying, "I'm going to kill you," and only let go after the victim lied and said they'd already called the cops. In a police statement obtained by PW Insider, it is stated that Whitmer arrived at the house in June unwanted and requested his girlfriend delete messages from him, and when she refused is when the attack began. A pre-trial hearing is scheduled for October 4th, and we'll keep following this case very closely. And we're ending with AEW, and if you've been on wrestling Twitter as of late, you'll likely have seen Daniel Garcia's viral dance, as the performance has been memed countless times on the platform. Now Tony Khan has gotten in on the fun, as during a gap in tapings between Dynamite finishing and Rampage starting, the AEW president gave his own rendition of the dance. Garcia's signature thrusting has taken the wrestling world by storm, and while we don't expect to see Khan bust out his own moves on TV, this moment certainly popped the crowd in New York City.